Hello, everyone. I'm Shadow, and this is Anything But the Music, where I talk to rock stars about the rock star shit they do outside of being rock stars. Today, I have with me Matt from Like a Storm. Been to Springfield multiple times, did one of our first Toys for Tickets. And today, we're going to talk with Matt about Amplify. Is that what it's
That's right.
called?
I
Okay.
like the way you delivered that with so much confidence, but then the end of it sounded like a question. I'm like, well, this is what I turned up to talk about.
Well, okay, so in preparation for this, I don't want to know anything. Like I didn't do any kind of research about Amplify. There's
Perfect.
multiple things that I've noticed with
Perfect.
you because we're friends on social media. And when I first met you, which was many moons ago, you were a little guy. Like I could have picked
Mhm.
you up and thrown you. And now you're like a big, bulky, strong guy, and you look like you've crazily working out. And you talk about this, so I'm assuming it's nutrition, but I don't know. You could be on steroids. It could be steroids for all I know. But I
That's it.
mean, you
That's
look
it. That's it.
great. You look great. So let's
Thank
hear
you.
about this amplify and what you're doing with it and how you got involved with it.
Okay. So, firstly, I want to say how nice it is to see you.
Good to see you too.
And secondly, I want to say that I really appreciate the thorough research that you put into this particular episode.
Thanks.
Um, so yes, nutrition is part of what Amplify is, but to take a few steps backwards, a lot of this really stemmed from uh, kind of my journey through life, and particularly what happened when the pandemic hit. And for anyone who doesn't know, don't be fooled by the fact that we're only talking about Amplify. I play in a band called Like a Storm, and that had been really my whole life. Um, right before the pandemic hit, we were touring all the time. I
Hmm.
think we had like 5 tours booked at the time that the pandemic hit, and that was New Zealand, Europe, UK, Japan, America. I mean, we were just constantly traveling, constantly playing, and it was amazing. But that the pace of that lifestyle really starts to take its toll. And I'd always had kind of a love-hate relationship with alcohol,
Hmm.
where I knew that it wasn't really a good thing for me, but I did have these phases of leaning on it very heavily because, if you can imagine, as exciting as it is to tour the world, I mean, shit, you can only do that for so long before you're rolling out of bed and you're like, I don't have the energy to get up. Never mind, do I have the energy to get through to the show that night? Or even to do interviews or any of the things that you have to do.
Yeah.
And so I started to lean on that more and more. And right before the pandemic hit, I had a phase where I was really I was aware that I was like pushing it too much with the travel we were doing. I was really burned out mentally and emotionally and physically, absolutely. Then the pandemic hits, and life as we knew it, being touring musicians, everything stopped. And to make things, I don't want to say worse, but let's say more surreal, we were at home in New Zealand doing a tour. And so when the world shut down, I wasn't here in Vegas where I live. I was back home in Auckland, where we were sort of doing a combination of touring and visiting our parents and visiting our mates who we grew up with, and sort of doing this like reconnection. And that was amazing. But then everything stopped, and now you're on the other side of the world, in your hometown that you haven't lived in for a long time. And everyone else's lives have progressed, and your life has been traveling and playing music. And after a couple of weeks, you start to realize like this COVID thing isn't going away.
Yeah.
This pandemic isn't ending anytime soon. So all of our tours were like everybody else. All of our tours were postponed, then they were cancelled. Then you start dealing with these thoughts that you've literally never had, like, what if touring is a thing of the past? What if we never get to do that again? And even if that doesn't happen, what the hell is going to happen to us in the meantime? So it became quite a stressful time. And even though there were some real benefits in terms of the fact that we were home, so we got to spend time with our parents and spend time with, later on, our grandfather and our friends, initially we were all under lockdown. So New Zealand, for anyone who doesn't know, had a very strict lockdown
Yeah.
policy during the pandemic. And we had quite long periods of time where you literally couldn't leave your neighborhood. And you couldn't leave the house other than for certain reasons. And if you went far beyond where you were supposed to be, then the cops would pull you over. And if you didn't have the right documentation, then you'd be escorted back home again. So that was their efforts to control the virus. But nevertheless, if you take people who are used to being on tour and traveling and playing every night, and then you put them in a place that they haven't been for a decade, and then you add the stress of the pandemic, as you can imagine, it becomes rather challenging. And one of the things that I found that I turned back to was alcohol. And that wasn't something that I didn't think it was a good idea at the time, but I didn't feel that I had a lot of other options. And so I think that's really for me where this whole thing started, is that I think it's easy to look at someone who now doesn't drink and is very health focused, is very outspoken about mental health, physical health, and think, oh, well, that guy's got it all figured out. He must have figured this out a long time ago. But for me, it really happened during that pandemic when, like for a lot of musicians, things just basically got worse and worse and worse. And if you don't look to the right coping mechanisms, then you find yourself seeking the wrong ones. And that's why I'm now so not just like committed to living my life this way, but this is why I'm so outspoken about it, is because it took a process of me really hitting rock bottom. And in doing so in a very strange environment, because we were in lockdown and we weren't touring and we were in a country that we hadn't been in for years. And so in a weird way, it was kind of like the life equivalent of, being in a cabin in the woods. You just like, what the fuck happened to the life that I knew? Now I'm in this totally different place. And so I well and truly hit rock bottom. And I realized that things needed to change. And there were really only a couple of ways that it could go. And it's interesting because since I've started to share my journey with other people, then I've heard a lot from those people about their lives. And one thing that I find really interesting and also kind of fascinating is that even though we have such different lives and people have different jobs, and I mean, I even grew up in a different country on the other side of the world, but there are so many similarities in how human beings cope with stressful situations. And there are so many ways that you can very easily start going down the wrong path. And at that point in time, it's really fucking hard to get off it. So part of the reason that once I started turning things around, I started to make this almost like part of my identity, is that it sort of becomes part of who you are. It's a very significant change that you make. And so Amplify was born out of me realizing that path was done. And then I had to think, okay, well, does that mean that I don't play music anymore? Can I go on tour as someone who doesn't drink, as someone who is very health focused? Can I even survive in this business without all those coping mechanisms? And I know that's something that you'll relate to, because a lot of a lot of the lifestyle of like rock and roll is in rock radio too. So it's this whole big thing that we all kind of deal with. And like most things in life, in moderation, it's great. But if you aren't someone who, I'm not really a person who lends themselves to moderation, and I never have been. And the thing is, that's both my great weakness and my great strength. Because when I apply that attitude, that kind of obsessive nature to something like music, then that's how I get to have this amazing life where we make records. And I grew up in New Zealand and I've toured the world and I've done all these amazing things. But that same obsession can absolutely work against you. And so for me, this whole like journey that I've been on, and particularly the last year when I've really started talking about it, this is like where my life is going now. And one of the most rewarding things for me is to see how many other people have walked that path and how many other people have triumphed, and also to see the potential of everybody that you can help. It's not it's not a like an ecosystem of defeated people. It's an incredibly strong person who like the kind of people who see my posts and write to me and like bare their soul. I mean, that takes fucking strength, man. Um, it's easy to project like a certain image of being unaffected by things, and it's easy to play a role. And I know that from experience because, and this is one of the things that I talk about in my posts. You know, being a musician is also being a performer. And what do performers do? By definition, they perform. So you wake up in the morning, maybe it's your, you know, it's like the seventh show that week and you're in the 20th country. And even though it's an awesome life, but you're just fucking exhausted on every level. What does a performer do? They do whatever they have to do to perform. And that is, on one hand, kind of an admirable trait. And on the other hand, it's a fucking disaster because what people start to do, including me, is you start to gravitate towards the things that will get you from where you are now to where you think you need to be. And those are almost always the wrong decisions because you're not asking yourself the right questions. You're not saying, hey, why do I feel this way in the first place? Is it because I'm completely exhausted? Is it because maybe I haven't developed the right coping mechanisms? Is it because maybe I don't have a particularly healthy relationship with the coping mechanisms that I do have? And it's sort of like if you don't ask yourself those questions, and I think for a lot of us, you work quite hard to avoid those questions. So you're just kind of like hiding from that reality, and you're just sort of doing whatever it takes to get you on stage that night. And one of the things that I found particularly scary is to see that sort of pattern of obsession and addiction still functions if you take the shows away. So this is one of the things that I know is very common with musicians and performers because I've talked to a lot of musicians about this. You can kind of justify it to yourself when you wake up in the morning and you say, I've got to get on stage that night. People have come from miles away to see me. There's this whole machine around us being in this city at this time to play this show. So whatever it takes to get me up there, and whatever it takes more than that to get me in the mood to play a show, like not just to stand there like a fucking zombie, but like I've got to put on a show for people because that's why they're here. But once you take all that away, those same mechanisms of addiction are still there. Only now you don't have that excuse anymore. And that, I think, is what the pandemic did for me, is I realized, okay, I've been using this thing as a crutch, and I've been telling myself that in some way this serves the greater good. This gets me on stage. This gets me to be friendly at a meet and greet. When, to be honest, like, I do love our fans, but when you've been on tour like night after night after night after night, you don't want to talk to anybody. It doesn't matter who they are, you know. What
Yep.
you want to do is fucking go to your hotel room and turn all the lights off and get into bed. Like, that's actually what you want. So how do I turn on the charm when I'm completely exhausted? Alcohol. How do I get myself on stage? Alcohol. And there had been times in my life when I had managed to sort of pivot away from that, but I'd never really addressed why I was doing it. So, of course, what happens every time the shit hits the fan, guess what's coming back again? Because you haven't actually solved any of the problems and you haven't looked to something new. So part of the reason that, as you say, I work out like a madman or whatever it was you said, um, this is part of the way that I live my life now. And to be perfectly honest, there are many things that happened during the pandemic that at the time were really fucking difficult. But in hindsight, I'm so grateful that they happened because it's so easy to stay on that path unless something happens to change the course of where you're going.
Did making these changes, did the other band members jump on board? Are they still kind of doing the same thing? Are you guys all on the same page, or, because I mean, one person in the band gets sober, the other band members are possibly not. Did Like a Storm do that, or?
To be honest, everybody in this band is on their own path. So this was something that I did completely on my own. I didn't have any expectations that anybody would join in just because, well, this is my life now, so
Yeah.
now it has to be your life. And in a way, that was exacerbated by the fact that I also literally did it in a pandemic. So it wasn't just, hey, this is something that I'm doing on my own. It was like I'm literally fucking on my own in my parents' house, going like, what the hell happened to the life that I thought I had? So it's almost like that, like the isolation was very intense. And so much of being on tour, everybody knows that who has been in a touring band, people who've been on a sports team, been in the military, like so much of what you love about that is the sort of camaraderie. And all of a sudden, you take away the crew, you take away your band members. And Chris was there with me because he and I were both staying with our parents to spend some quality time. Now, we never knew that that was going to extend for a period of years. But this journey that I was on was very much like, this is what I'm doing. And it's interesting that you say that because, to be honest, until now, it never occurred to me that it would be a group thing. I do know that other bands or other groups of people have made like a collective decision. Hey, we're going to go this direction now. But for me, it was such a personal thing that it almost didn't occur to me that anybody else would be coming along for the ride. It was like, this is not about the band. This is not about any band. This is about like a human being trying to figure out a better way forward. And I think in a lot of ways that's actually been a real advantage because it meant that I had to develop the skills myself, knowing that I was going to be around people who drink and people who pretty much, and I'm not speaking so much about the other guys in the band, but I mean, it wasn't like every one of my friends from back home got sober either. So you know that you're going to be around the way that a lot of people live their lives, and you have to learn, at least for me, I had to learn to truly not want those things, not just to take them away like a little kid trying to reach the top shelf because that's where the candy is. I had to remove it to the point where it's like I don't want anything to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
So people can do whatever they want, and honestly, at this point, um, it doesn't faze me at all. because I know what happens to me if I go down that path. Like I've seen that. I've seen reruns of that show. I was going to say I've seen that show before, but I've seen more than just the show. I've seen the reruns, and then I've seen the reruns of the reruns, and after a while, you're like, I know where that goes.
Yeah.
So yeah, it became this very like. Sometimes I describe it as like one of those old kung fu movies where you like climb to the top of the mountain and you meet the guy with the long, like Kill Bill, you know, you meet the guy with the long white beard and he teaches you how to be like a kung fu master. And in many ways, a lot of the pandemic for me was like climbing that hill. Like I was pretty much on my own. I had the support of people around me, but I was on the journey myself.
Right.
And I think in a lot of ways, that has been a real positive.
So is Amplify like a product, or is this a metaphor for the journey?
Well, anytime I can try to appear more intelligent than I am, I'll take it. So let's say it's a metaphor. Um, no, so Amplify is something that I started, um, which came directly out of my friendship with a very talented guy named Fraser Bailey. And Fraser and I have been friends for a long time. He's a fellow New Zealander living in the States. And Fraser is an elite level nutritionist and strength trainer. And if anyone has seen like the new Daughtry videos where Chris Daughtry is super buff and
Right.
shredded, Fraser is his trainer and his nutritionist. So,
Oh.
so one of the things that happened, and this is, I guess, maybe I am clever because I am coming up with a metaphor. It does come back to the sort of the kung fu movie. I was climbing the mountain on my own, and I had stopped drinking, and I had stopped smoking and vaping, and I mean, because if you have an addictive personality, like good luck, you know, good luck rationing yourself to one cigarette a day, or I mean, I was just chaining that shit any
Yeah.
chance I got. So I knew there was no way I was going to get fit and healthy when I'm what we call durries back home, cigarettes. So if I was just chaining them any chance I get, then so okay, so like those have to go. And what else has to go? Junk food, okay, because that's making me feel like shit. And in many ways, sugar is as bad a poison as anything. So I started changing my diet and I was climbing the mountain. I was in the Kung Fu movie and I was climbing the mountain. One of the gifts of the pandemic is that Fraser was home visiting his family at the same time that I was. And I hadn't seen him for years. I'd been in the States and then I'd been kind of touring the world. And he had been living in the States, building this amazing sort of training program. And we had the opportunity that we were both in the same place. And so I went and I met up with him. And when I was talking to him, I was like, holy shit, I mean, quite apart from having that amazing feeling that you have when you reconnect with someone that you've known your whole life, I also just realized like this dude is where I want to be. Like this is a guy who has been through the process that I'm going through, only he is so fucking far down the road. And I want to know everything he knows. You know, this is the guy that I want to be around. And so he and I started messaging all the time. And we started messaging all the time, even once we came back to the States separately and sort of started to live our lives again. And it's something that we still do to this day. So Fraser and I message every single day. And in fact, I was messaging him immediately before this interview. So he really has become a mentor to me, even though we've been best friends for pretty much our whole lives. And it was through the course of these conversations with Fraser that he said to me, you know, dude, I know this sounds crazy, but I really think that you could take the things that you have learned and help people. And me being like a natural introvert, like a lot of musicians, right? So this is a thing that some people know, some people don't know. But part of what compels people to become performers is that they don't actually want to be out there talking to people all the time. They're actually very introverted people.
Yes.
And performance is a way of channeling that. So that's why people are often like, oh, I met the singer for this band and he was really standoffish. It's like, no, dude, you met a total introvert and he's just being himself. Now, we might turn up to a conversation with expectations about what we would like to say, but it doesn't mean that you're going to change the personality of the person that you're talking to. So I was very much like that. I'm like, in many ways, sort of a textbook introvert. And so the thought of like sharing this journey, this very personal journey with people, and especially people that know me through the band. I mean, I don't think I ever said this to him, but I was thinking, like, are you fucking crazy? Like, you think I'm gonna take all of these things that I've had to go through and I'm just gonna like fucking spill them on social media? And the thing is, he was right. He was absolutely right. It was not only very sort of cathartic for me to start talking about these things, but immediately I started hearing from people. So immediately I started hearing from people who have also given up drinking, people who have also become very health focused, people who, like me, have realized the direct connection between physical health and mental health. You know, if you feel depressed, it doesn't mean that you completely disregard what you're thinking, but you also should be asking yourself, do I have any reason to feel good? Am I actually doing anything physical? Am I eating anything good? Or am I eating shit and drinking myself to sleep each night? In which case, I mean, that's a recipe for starting to feel depressed right there, just physiologically. You can even take out the mental component at that point. It's just a cocktail that makes people feel down. And so I started to hear from people who had been on the same journey. And then the other thing is I started to hear from people who wanted to be on that journey. And that's where I started thinking about Amplify. And again, I was thinking, you know, Phrase has encouraged me the whole way. He's going to watch this and he's going to get embarrassed because, you know, I mean, I love him, man. Really, we've been best friends for so long, but he really has been a mentor to me through this part of my life. And he was the one who started encouraging me to start helping people. So I would say to him, you know, I feel like I can offer insight and advice to these people, but like, who the fuck am I to offer advice? Like, I'm a musician. I'm not a psychologist. Now, I did go to university for psychology, which is something that a lot of people don't know, but I dropped out to come and play rock and roll. so, so that's like one potential tangent that my life could have taken and probably would have taken had I not moved to North America with my brothers in like a storm. So it's always an interest that I'd had, but I didn't feel particularly qualified to help people. And Phrase said to me, he said, all you need to remember is that you're further ahead on this journey than the people that you're helping. Just like I'm further ahead on this journey than you are. It's like a train of people, like a line.
Yeah.
And as soon as I started thinking about that, then my whole attitude towards it changed. I stopped thinking, I'm not, I mean, classic self-limiting belief. I'm not enough. I'm not educated enough. I'm not experienced enough. I'm not, insert word here, enough. I stopped thinking like that. And I started thinking, well, shit, I can help that guy because I was that guy. You know, 2 years ago, I was in the position that that guy was. And so I started to help people, and it's now evolved into me working with people both one-on-one through Amplify coaching, and then also starting this group called the Amplify Community, which is something that I started when I realized that one of the true strengths is to take a bunch of like-minded people who are trying to change their lives for the better and putting them in a group. Because in a lot of ways, one of the most difficult things for me about the pandemic is that I was doing it in isolation. And it makes for a cool story in hindsight. And I get to talk about like, you know, yeah, and it was just me and I was doing it on my own and I had all this grit and discipline and shit. But to be honest, it would have been a lot easier had I been part of a group of like-minded people.
Right.
So I also created that community, and this has become, in combination with working on our fifth album for Like a Storm, this has become a big part of my life. So when you hit me up about the idea of doing an interview about Amplify, I have spoken about it before in different interviews, but this is the first interview I've ever done where we really focus on it.
Mhm.
So I want to genuinely thank you for that, for having the opportunity to talk about it.
You're welcome. I mean, that's the whole point of this podcast is, I've always wanted to know what, rock star. I've never wanted to ask those mundane questions, like what's your favorite song to perform on stage? What's inspired these lyrics? Hey, when's your next tour? In fact, I had to do one earlier today, and it's almost like I forgot how to interview the artists. I was like, I want to ask you other questions, not, but
Yeah.
I did it. I did it. Professionalism prevailed. Um, but yeah, I mean, I saw the transformation online, and I mean, like whether you like it or not, you are an artist and people do follow you, people do look up to you, people do want to hear what you have to say. So, if you can make that switch and, help people along the way as a little side hustle, I think that's pretty cool. So, I mean, I kind of I mean, I drank quite a bit at the beginning of the pandemic, but I ended up almost like I don't say that I quit because I still drink on occasion, but it's not like what you and I used to do back in the day, not even close. I
Yeah.
probably have a drink maybe once every few months, but now
Wow.
have I given up my pizza or chocolate? No, I have not given that stuff up yet. But,
Well, look, come and join the Amplify community. We'll get you sorted out.
oh no, no
it's it's
sugar.
it's it's interesting because I know that you're joking, but you do raise something that is this has been part of my learning process. And one of the things that I always like to tell people is, in many ways, people who are wired like I am, people who are sort of sensitive and artistic, and to be honest, I mean, it's kind of accepted in society that artists are a little different. They are very sensitive. And I mean, what kind of person? I mean, I spent my teenage years in my bedroom writing songs. If you don't feel things strongly, you would never be in your bedroom writing songs about it. So it's like that's the giveaway right there. How does someone become a songwriter? Because they have fucking feelings to get out through song. But on the other hand, it's also kind of not necessarily accepted, particularly for guys. You know, there has been this big push towards talking about mental health and destigmatizing mental health. And that I think is amazing, particularly as someone like if I don't look after myself, then anxiety and depression are absolutely things that I have to deal with. So that's part of what keeps me on the track is that I know exactly what happens if I stray off the track. But the other thing is, I kind of realized that as much as everybody was talking about mental health, and particularly during the pandemic, um, a lot of people weren't really doing anything.
Yeah.
So it's one thing to talk about it, and it is amazing. Awareness is key, right? So how the hell do you have awareness if no one is speaking about anything? So that first step of communicating how you're feeling is massive. But the thing that I say to people who I work with now is it's amazing to express that. Now, what are we going to do with it?
Yeah.
Because knowing something and even saying it out loud and owning it, I'm like, I can say it right here on this interview. I'm a person who struggles with depression and anxiety if I don't look after myself. Like that is absolutely what happens to me. For a long time, you could have fucking never got me to say that on an interview. I would never have said that, because you kind of feel like you have to show up. It's a funny thing, because on the one hand, people expect artists to be a bit different, but on the other hand, you kind of feel like you have to show up always having your shit together, like you're some sort of superhuman. But the thing is, like, what are we doing about it? That was what I had to ask myself. And that's what I asked the people that I work with. And then I work with them to do it. But to have a community of people like musicians talking about mental health is amazing. But the next thing is, what are we doing about it? Are we just expressing that the house is on fire and we're just standing on the sidewalk watching it burn? You know, is that what we're doing? Are we just going, hey, for decades, musicians felt like they couldn't really share how they actually felt, which is kind of ironic, because that's the connection between musicians and fans, is that you're talking about your feelings and these emotions and significant events through song. But I know that a lot of musicians, myself included, for a long time felt like we couldn't actually, like, you couldn't say to someone, well, you didn't feel like you could. You couldn't say to someone, dude, I feel really fucking depressed. Like, I think that the touring that we're doing, and the fact that we're not getting any of the things that a human being actually needs to feel normal, sleep, exercise, decent food, and trying to minimize the sort of the poisons as much as possible. I'm not getting any of that, and it's really starting to make me feel pretty fucking terrible. I never really felt like I could say that to people. And I know a lot of other musicians who are the same. And that's why people start leaning on alcohol. That's why people start leaning on other substances, because if you feel like you can't express yourself and start solving the problems, then all you can do is try to forget about it. So for me, part of this process of my own journey and expressing my own struggles with mental health and talking to other people about it and seeing this kind of increasing awareness within the music community, I mean, I think that is amazing. But I truly believe that the next step is just as important, if not more important. What are we actually doing? Do we want to sit around talking about feeling depressed and drinking ourselves to sleep? Because I do know a lot of people who do that. And I'm not trying to judge them. People can live their lives however they want. But I will say that doesn't get you feeling less depressed. That's just the unfortunate biochemical reality of how we're put together. So part of me becoming so outspoken is to sort of, like, you kind of have to shock people into paying attention. And I use myself as a kind of as an avatar. But ultimately, often what I'm doing is trying to get people to think about themselves. Because how do you change someone's life if they're never thinking about themselves in their own life? Like, if people are just constantly looking at me and going, wow, that guy looks fit. Or sometimes people will write to me and go, I thought you looked better with blonde hair. You know, which I always think, like, I mean, I get it, because for some reason as human beings, we have a weird fascination with people's hair. But I always think, like, that's what you took away from this? Like, I've been sharing all this stuff about my life, my journey, the fact that I quit drinking, my mental health, a bunch of very valuable tools that people can use to improve their own lives. And the thing that you felt compelled to reach out and say to me is that you thought my hair looked better when it was a different color. It's kind of fascinating.
It's people for you. That's, I mean.
Yeah, it is. Well, I mean, it makes sense, because let's face it, like, a lot of us, most of us, we don't want to fucking deal with how we feel, because who wants to do that? You know, that's why people avoid going to therapy. It's why people avoid getting sober. It's why people avoid going to the gym. Like, human beings are amazing at avoidance. It is so much easier to complain about something and avoid the solution
Or coming
than
up
it is,
with excuses.
or coming up with excuses. Yeah,
Excuses
exactly.
are, like the big thing, I think, the big blockage of doing
Yeah.
things. I don't have time. I've got to do this. I got to, heck, guilty as charged. I mean, so,
Well, I
um,
mean, I think you're right. We all do it, but it's what's interesting is if something is important, it's amazing how we always have time for it.
yeah,
So on the one hand, it's this excuse. I didn't have time to get to the gym. I didn't have time to buy different food at the food store. Like there is a store that has everything you would ever need to lead a healthy life. And people just walk past the aisle to the next aisle. Like the barrier to switching your diet is as simple as going to a different fucking aisle. Like that's how easy it is, you know? But of course, we're telling ourselves, like, I don't have the time, I don't have the energy, I don't have the mental energy. That's a big one too. You know, how do I can't think about changing my life. I've got a fucking assignment due and I've got, the boss is on my ass. And there's always, these things do exist in our lives. None of us live in isolation. We're not lab rats. So we have to live our lives and we have to try and deal with the consequences of however we're doing that. But it also comes down to prioritizing. Like at a certain point, this is something that I was saying recently in one of my posts. At a certain point, this shit will become your top priority. And it's not something that I would ever wish on someone. Having been through my own version of this, I definitely wouldn't wish that on anybody. But it's amazing how things never make it to the top of the list until it's the only fucking thing in your life. And then you go, oh shit, I have a chronic health condition, or I have like a complete substance abuse problem. I have no healthy relationships in my life. I don't have a healthy relationship with myself. That's why I keep doing the things that I'm doing. It's almost like stuff stays at the bottom of the list until one day the universe goes, fuck you, we're going to turn this thing upside down. And
right.
now, what you did think was the top priority is very trivial. And what you thought was the bottom priority is sometimes literally a case of life and death. So, part of the reason that I talk about this stuff all the time is I'm deliberately like poking the bear. I want people to go, fuck, that was I didn't expect that guy to say that thing. Because sometimes that's what it takes, to take someone and go, hey man, I mean, I could sit here on this podcast and I could go, Shadow, the thing is, when you're eating pizza, this is what happens to you. And it's going to make you feel like this. You're going to feel this way chemically. You're going to feel a lot of shame and guilt and self-loathing about it. Now, the problem with that is that's going to trigger you into doing more things to seek comfort. And if you don't have good coping mechanisms, then where does that lead? Where does that lead? To more pizza. So I can sit here and like talk to you about it, but you can't change other people. The best thing you can do is try to share a message that makes them want to change.
Yeah.
And that is ultimately what Amplify is about. And that's certainly what I mean, if there was an apocalypse and social media went away, in terms of me as a human being, I couldn't care less. Like, I don't need to post selfies every day. I'm just being honest. Like, I know that often people think that musicians get into being in a band because you want to see your own face on the television and you want to be in magazines. It's like, I couldn't give a shit about any of that. Like, I want to play music and I'm willing to tolerate photo shoots and music videos and these other things that go along with it because I understand that this is part of the deal. But in terms of having a platform where you post a bunch of photos of yourself, I mean, anyone who knows me is like, that's about as far away from what I want as possible. So now I'm going, okay, there is a valuable tool in social media. I don't want to use it. Like, I don't have an agenda to post 365 selfies a year, but maybe I have an agenda to try and help people change their lives. And so that is why you've seen a shift. I mean, during the pandemic, anyone who was aware of my social media, I just hardly posted anything
No, you
because
didn't.
it
Yeah,
was like,
suddenly you
you
started
know, like,
popping up.
yeah.
You busted the algorithm, figured it out. 'Cause suddenly I'm like, "Huh, I haven't seen this guy in a long time." I'm like, what's he up to?" So,
Well, to be honest, for a lot of that pandemic, I didn't have anything that I wanted to share.
yeah,
Whether it was like, here's me, heading down to rock bottom, here's me at rock bottom, and then here's me figuring out, like, can I even be a musician after this? Can
yeah,
I even be friends with the people I was friends with? All these things you think about. I didn't want to share that with social media. And in hindsight, I wish that I had, because I've seen the value of that. But that's absolutely why I sort of disappeared. And now, through Fraser, really, through his encouragement, if it wasn't for him, I would be living my life this way, but I wouldn't be posting about it in the way that I am.
yeah,
And I have seen the value in being willing to put yourself out there. And I've also seen the value, to like how it makes me feel, like on a sort of a cathartic level, to actually share authentically what you think, especially in this kind of weird social media age we live in, where, I mean, shit, man, it's very difficult to know who thinks what or even what they look like.
mm,
Everything has a filter on it. Um, People get in these weird echo chambers thanks to the algorithms, where they're not actually engaging in discussion with anybody outside their weird little bubble. It's a very strange time to be a human being.
yeah,
So I am very grateful that one of the gifts that it does give is the opportunity to share your story if you're willing to do it. And I really do have to thank you. I have to thank Phrase for that. And I also have to thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about it here, because I have seen, as much as it's, I go to the gym every day, that's my thing. But for a lot of people, I think the thing that's helped them the most is not me getting fit, it's me talking authentically about what I've been through.
yeah. And that's I'm gonna just go back real quick because we're gonna wrap things up here soon. But going back, you asked the question like, what are we going to do about mental health? We're talking about it, we're talking about it, we're talking about it. But I mean, I can say that Q102 as a radio station, we've done a lot with mental health, suicide awareness, and we're kind of, jumping on that train. But really, it's just a matter of really talking about it, being open about it, telling others that you can talk about it, telling others that, hey, you can talk to me about it and I'm not going to judge you, stuff
Yeah.
like that. Especially, you're right, as a male and as a rock star, a little bit harder, females, we've always had our bitches to lean on. So, you know, I mean,
I'm very pleased that you said that sentence and not me.
so it's just I think personally it's going in the right direction. Currently right now I'm actually planning a mental health wellness kind of check-in event, where all the mental health advocates in the community are all in one place. It's not, doom and gloom. It's, hey, come on out, see what's available in our community. And if you need to reach out to them in the future, you know where they're at.
Yeah,
With
that's
line
amazing.
and everything. So, but it's just a matter of talking about it, I think, and just showing people that you're open to hear what they have to say. Actually, I did a
Yeah,
podcast with Jacoby of Papa Roach. He's very big into mental health, suicide
yeah,
awareness, and
yes.
stuff, and that's what we talked about the whole time. So I'll put the link down below. Am I supposed to say that? I'm new here.
Well, this is your show. I think you can basically say whatever you want.
Oh yeah, true. I'm also new here, but that being said, is there anything else like is is there a place people can go to check this out? Is there anything that you want to put out there that you want anyone to know?
For now, people can just find me on Facebook or Instagram. My handle is, I guess, as like, is that a backslash like a storm Matt?
Okay. I
That's
can put
on
the link in there
Facebook and
too.
Instagram. We'll put the link in there. You can do that, see, because it's your podcast, whereas
Yeah,
I don't have I don't have
send you
the
down
sign
there.
off on that. But the main thing I would say is just that I truly appreciate all the people who have reached out to me. And if people watch this interview and it pushes a button in them, whether in a good way or a challenging way, I would say please know that you can reach out to me. Because I think that has been, for me, that is really like the gift of opening up and talking about how you feel, is that as you say, as you just said, it creates a safe space for other people to do the same. So I would say anyone who feels like they have been moved in some way, please feel free to find me on social media, add me on social media, and reach out and message me.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Matt. It was great seeing you. And once again, you're out in Vegas and I was just out in Vegas and we missed each other, but hey, we got this. So
We did. We finally made it.
we
So
made
thank you
it.
so much for having me on.
All right. Thank you, Matt. And we'll be back in a few weeks with another episode of Anything But the Music.